The great council chamber stretched out like a crystal cathedral, its walls glowing with soft blue light. 12 different species sat in their designated areas, each section designed for their unique needs. The Zilithians floated in their energy pods, their translucent forms shimmering like living glass. The Arxians sat perfectly still, their metallic faces showing no emotion. The ancient Kethmori rested in their stone chairs, their 4 eyes blinking slowly as they watched the proceedings. Today was supposed to be routine: trade agreements, research updates, maybe a minor border dispute between colonies. Nothing that would shake the foundation of galactic civilization. Dr. Elena Vasquez walked into the chamber carrying a simple data pad. Her brown hair was tied back in a practical ponytail, and she wore the standard blue uniform of the human diplomatic corps. She looked small compared to the towering Vrex warriors or the massive Kethmori, but she carried herself with quiet confidence. The chamber fell silent as she approached the central speaking platform. President Zarian, a tall Zilithian, whose energy form pulsed with authority, gestured for her to begin. "Honored members of the Galactic Council," Elena said, her voice clear and steady. "I come before you today to deliver a formal message from the United Governments of Earth and all human colonies." She paused, looking around the chamber. Some of the aliens leaned forward with curiosity. Others seemed bored, expecting another human complaint about trade regulations or research protocols. "Effective immediately," Elena continued, "humanity is withdrawing from all galactic affairs. We are terminating our membership in the Galactic Council, ending all joint research projects, and recalling our citizens from every council world and space station." The silence that followed was deafening. Then chaos erupted. The Vrex delegation jumped to their feet, their warrior instincts making them reach for weapons that weren't there. The Arxians began rapid calculations on their neural networks, trying to process this unexpected data. The smaller species chittered and whispered among themselves in their native languages. President Zirion's energy form flared brighter. "Dr. Vasquez, surely this is some kind of mistake. Humanity has been a valued member of our community for 37 years. Elena shook her head. "No mistake, President Zarion. We came seeking partnership, but we found only bureaucracy. We offered ideas, but you wanted conformity. We shared our culture, but you called it primitive. We're going home." Admiral Thexkar of the Vrex Empire slammed his fist on his speaking platform. "You cannot simply leave. You have obligations, treaties, all of which we will honor during our withdrawal period," Elena replied calmly. "Every human facility will be transferred to council control in perfect working order. Every shared project will be completed or handed over with full documentation. Every debt will be paid, every agreement fulfilled." Dr. Zexlan of the Arxians calculated quickly. "But your research contributions, your trade networks, your cultural exchanges will end," Elena said simply. "We're not angry. We're not seeking revenge. We're just tired of trying to fit into a system that doesn't want us as we are." The ancient Kethmori representative, Elder Morthok, spoke in his deep, rumbling voice. "Young species often struggle with the patience required for galactic cooperation. Perhaps in a few centuries." Elena smiled sadly. "With respect, Elder, this isn't about patience. This is about belonging. You've made it clear that humans are too emotional, too unpredictable, too chaotic for proper galactic society. So we're removing the problem." Over the following months, the galaxy watched in stunned silence as humanity kept its word. Human ships arrived at every world, every station, every outpost where humans lived and worked. They packed efficiently, said polite goodbyes, and left. On Research Station Alpha 7, Dr. James Wong finished his quantum mechanics project and handed all his notes to his Arxian colleague. "But your methodology, Doctor," Zexlan protested. "Your intuitive approaches, your metaphorical thinking, you called them unscientific," James reminded him gently. "Maybe you're right. Maybe pure logic is better." On the military training world of Koreth, Colonel Sarah Chen completed her final joint exercise with Vrex forces. Admiral Zextar watched her pack her tactical manuals with regret. "Your unconventional strategies," he said. "They were interesting," Sarah shrugged. "You called them chaotic and undisciplined. Maybe traditional honor-bound tactics are more reliable." In the art galleries of Zelith Prime, human curator Maria Santos closed the Human Cultural Center. The Zelithian artists who had worked with her gathered to say goodbye. "But your emotional responses to our work," they said. "Your questions about meaning and feeling." "You said they were primitive," Maria replied. "Maybe pure aesthetic logic is more advanced." The council told themselves this was for the best. Without human emotional outbursts, sessions would be more efficient. Without human questions about why and what if, research would follow proper scientific method. Without human art and music cluttering the cultural networks, true civilization could flourish. The last human ship left Council space on a Tuesday. Captain Lisa Park, commanding the transport vessel New Horizon, broadcast a final message to the galaxy. "To our former colleagues and friends, we wish you well. We hope you find the peace and order you were seeking. Perhaps someday, when we're older and wiser, our paths will cross again. Until then, may you prosper among the stars." The council voted unanimously to classify the Sol system as primitive species, no contact. The file was stored in the archives and marked as closed. President Zerion addressed the galaxy that evening. "Today marks a new chapter in galactic civilization. We return to the proven methods that have kept peace for millennia. Logic, order, and proper scientific protocol will guide us forward." In the weeks that followed, council efficiency improved dramatically. Sessions ended early. Research proceeded along established guidelines. Art and culture developed according to traditional aesthetic principles. Everything was working exactly as planned. The galaxy was finally at peace, organized and logical in every way. And for the first time in 37 years, the stars seemed a little quieter. 2 years had passed since the humans left, and Admiral Zextar of the Vrex Empire was staring at a tactical display that made no sense. The hive swarms of Kepler 442 had returned, just as they did every 50 years. But this time, everything was different. For 12 centuries, the Vrex had fought the hive with honor and tradition. Their battle doctrine was perfect, tested by time and written in the blood of heroes. The swarms came in predictable waves. The Vrex met them with disciplined formations. And after months of glorious combat, the invaders would retreat to their dark worlds. Not this time. The swarms moved like liquid chaos, flowing around Vrex battle lines like water around rocks. They attacked from impossible angles, retreated when they should advance, and advanced when logic said they should run. Every traditional response failed. Every textbook maneuver was countered before it could be completed. The Vrex fleet had lost 30 ships in 3 days. In 12 centuries of warfare, they had never lost more than 5. Admiral Zextar stood in his command chamber, his scaled hands gripping the edge of his tactical table. His honor guard waited silently behind him, their own confusion hidden behind warrior masks. "Show me the battle records again," Zextar ordered. The holographic display lit up with the previous day's engagement. The Vrex Third Fleet had moved into standard attack formation, approaching the swarm cluster with disciplined precision. The moment they entered weapon range, the swarms scattered like startled fish, then regrouped behind the Vrex ships in a pattern that defied all military logic. "They broke formation to attack our rear," his tactical officer reported. "By the time we turned to face them, they were gone again." Zextar watched his proud ships burning in the display. "Run probability analysis on their attack pattern." "Already done, Admiral. There is no pattern, no logic, no strategy." "Everything has strategy," Zextar roared. "Find it." But after hours of analysis, his best minds found nothing. The swarms seemed to be operating on pure instinct, making decisions that made no tactical sense but somehow worked perfectly. In desperation, Zextar ordered his staff to search the military archives for anything that might help. That's when Lieutenant Morketh found the old training recordings. "Admiral, the young officer said hesitantly. I found something strange in the human files. Zextar's expression darkened. The humans are gone, Lieutenant. Their chaos serves us no purpose now. Please, sir. Just watch this. The recording showed a joint training exercise from 3 years ago. A human officer, Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Chen, was working with Vrex cadets on tactical scenarios. The exercise was simple. Defend a space station against random attacks. Zextar watched his young warriors set up perfect defensive formations, positioning their ships according to military doctrine. Then the simulated attacks began, and everything went wrong. Your formations are too rigid, Chen was saying in the recording. What happens if the enemy doesn't attack where you expect? One of the cadets spoke up proudly. Our doctrine covers all possible attack vectors, human. We have 17 different defensive formations for every scenario. Chen smiled. What if I attack from 18 different directions at once? That would be impossible, the cadet replied. No commander would waste resources on such chaos. Watch and learn, Chen said. The simulation reset, and this time, Chen controlled the attacking force. What followed was exactly what Zextar was seeing now in the real battle reports. Attacks from impossible angles, retreats that became flanking maneuvers, chaos that somehow created perfect opportunities. The Vrex cadets lost completely. How? One of them asked after the simulation ended. Chen shrugged. I didn't follow any plan. I just looked for opportunities and took them. Plans are good, but adaptation is better. Remember, the enemy gets a vote too. She pulled up a tactical display. Here's 17 backup plans for the same scenario. Maybe I'll use Plan 5. Or maybe I'll do something completely different if I see a better chance. The key is staying flexible. Admiral Zextar watched in growing amazement as Chen effortlessly designed strategy after strategy, each one accounting for variables that Vrex doctrine didn't even consider. Weather patterns that might affect sensors, supply delays that could change timing, even the possibility that communication systems might fail at the worst moment. Improvisation, Chen called it. The art of making it up as you go along. Meanwhile, on Arxia Prime, Dr. Zexlan was facing his own impossible problem. The quantum research that had stalled for decades was getting worse, not better. Every logical approach led to the same dead end. Every calculation produced the same unsolvable equation. He found himself thinking about his old colleague, Dr. James Wong, and the human's strange approach to scientific problems. Wong had always asked questions that seemed to have nothing to do with physics. What if quantum particles are shy? Wong had once suggested during a late-night research session. What if they don't like being watched? Oh, at the time, Zexlan had dismissed this as typical human emotionalism. Particles didn't have feelings. They followed mathematical laws, not psychological ones. But now, staring at equations that refused to resolve, Zexlan found himself wondering, what if Wong had been onto something? What if the human's intuitive leaps, his metaphorical thinking, his unscientific methodology, had actually been a different kind of science? Zexlan pulled up Wong's old research files. The human's notes were filled with strange drawings, weird analogies, and approaches that no proper Arxian would consider. But buried in the chaos were insights that made Zexlan's logical mind spin. Think of quantum entanglement like twins who always know what the other is feeling, one note read. Distance doesn't matter, because they're connected by something deeper than space. It was completely unscientific. It was also exactly the breakthrough Zexlan had been seeking for 20 years. Across the galaxy, other species were beginning to notice gaps they couldn't explain. The Merchant Confederacy was struggling with market fluctuations that their economic models couldn't predict. The Zilithian art councils were producing work that critics called technically perfect but somehow empty. And in the deep archives of the Keth Mori, Elder Morthak was beginning to notice a disturbing pattern in the historical records. Every major breakthrough in galactic civilization over the past century had one thing in common: human involvement. Not human leadership. They had been too new for that. But human questions that seemed naive had sparked new research directions. Human suggestions that seemed impossible had led to unexpected discoveries. Human chaos had somehow catalyzed progress in ways that pure logic never could, but it was too soon for anyone to admit they had made a mistake. The humans had chosen to leave. The galaxy was better off without their emotional unpredictability, wasn't it? In his command chamber, Admiral Zextar made a decision that went against everything he had been taught. He ordered his tactical officers to study every human combat recording they could find. "We're going to learn their chaos," he announced to his shocked staff. "Because honor without victory is just an expensive way to die." The stars, it seemed, were about to get much more interesting. The economic crisis hit the Merchant Confederacy like a wave of ice water. Trade routes that had been stable for decades suddenly collapsed. Entire star systems found themselves cut off from essential supplies. Markets that had run smoothly for generations were now swinging between boom and bust with terrifying speed. Merchant Prince Koltar stared at the economic reports spread across his crystal desk. His tentacles moved nervously as he tried to make sense of numbers that refused to make sense. "How did this happen?" he demanded of his chief analyst. "Our systems are perfect. Our algorithms account for every variable." The analyst, a thin Zilithian named Velmos, shifted uncomfortably in his energy pod. "The patterns began 18 months ago, shortly after the humans departed. Small fluctuations at first, but they've been building." Koltar's eyes focused on a particular sector report. "The Outer Rim colonies are completely cut off. Who authorized the termination of supply runs to non-profitable systems?" "No one, sir. The trade algorithms determined that those routes were economically inefficient. Standard procedure. Standard procedure that will kill millions," Koltar snapped. "How were those colonies being supplied before?" Velmos checked his records. "Human trading vessels, sir. They maintained regular supply runs, despite showing consistent losses on their balance sheets." "Losses? Then why did they continue?" The analyst seemed puzzled by the question. "The human records indicate they considered it the right thing to do. They classified essential supplies to struggling colonies as investment in future stability rather than pure profit. Calculations." Koltar felt something cold settle in his stomach. He pulled up more records, diving deeper into the trading patterns that had sustained galactic commerce for 30 years. What he found horrified him. The humans hadn't been bad at economics. They had been playing an entirely different game. While other species focused on maximum efficiency and profit, humans had maintained trade routes that seemed irrational but actually prevented market bubbles. They bought art from struggling colonies not because it was profitable, but because cultural diversity strengthened the overall economic ecosystem. Human traders had been willing to take losses on essential goods if it meant keeping smaller worlds connected to the galactic economy. They had invested in long-term relationships rather than short-term gains. They had even maintained emergency stockpiles on remote worlds, just in case something bad happened. Now those emergency supplies were the only thing keeping entire star systems alive. "Sir," Velmos said quietly, "there's something else." The human departure also removed their largest art buyers from the market. Cultural goods from 17 different species have lost their primary purchasers. On Zelith Prime, the effects were becoming impossible to ignore. The great art galleries that had showcased the finest creations in the galaxy were growing strangely quiet. Master artist Luxandra floated through her studio, staring at her latest work with growing dissatisfaction. It was perfect. Every line balanced. Every color harmonious. Every element precisely calculated. According to aesthetic, mathematical principles, it was the finest example of Zilithian art theory she had ever created. It was also completely lifeless. Luxandra's apprentice drifted into the studio. "Master, the Council of Aesthetic Excellence wishes to display your new piece in the Grand Gallery." "No," Luxandra said abruptly. The apprentice's energy form flickered with confusion. "But Master, it achieves perfect harmonic resonance. The mathematical beauty is flawless." "Yes," Luxandra agreed. "That's the problem." She moved to her archive, searching through recordings of past gallery openings. She found what she was looking for: footage from 3 years ago, when the Human Cultural Center had unveiled their collaborative exhibit. In the recording, humans walked through the Zilithian displays with expressions Luxandra had once dismissed as primitive emotionalism. They asked questions that seemed naive. They cried at tragic pieces and laughed at joyful ones. They saw connections between artworks that no mathematical analysis could predict. And in their responses, Luxandra now realized, lay the spark that had driven her creativity for decades. Your work makes me feel like I'm floating in starlight, one human visitor had said about her piece, Void's Dance. It reminds me of my grandmother's lullabies. At the time, Luxandra had been confused. Her piece was about mathematical relationships in space-time, not about family memories. But now she understood. The human's emotional response had revealed something in her work that she hadn't even known was there. Without human eyes to see unexpected beauty, without human hearts to feel unintended emotions, Zilithian art had become technically perfect, but spiritually empty. They had been creating for an audience that no longer existed. In the ancient archives of Keth Mori Prime, Elder Morthok was making discoveries that shook him to his core. As the official keeper of galactic history, he had access to records going back thousands of years, and the pattern he was seeing was undeniable. Every major advancement in galactic civilization over the past 30 years had human fingerprints on it. The breakthrough in faster-than-light communication started by a human asking, "What if we sang to the quantum field instead of shouting at it?" The development of sustainable fusion technology, inspired by a human engineer who wondered, "Why do we fight the reaction instead of dancing with it?" The peace treaty that ended the sectarian wars, mediated by a human diplomat who asked both sides, "What do your children dream about?" The humans hadn't led these advances. They had been too new, too inexperienced for that. But their questions, their different way of thinking, their emotional perspective had catalyzed breakthroughs that pure logic couldn't achieve. Morthok's four eyes focused on a particularly disturbing entry. In the past 2 years, since humanity's departure, the rate of galactic innovation had dropped by 73%. Research projects were stalling. Diplomatic solutions were becoming harder to find. Cultural development had slowed to a crawl. The galaxy wasn't just missing humans. It was missing the unique perspective they brought to every interaction. Meanwhile, Dr. Zexlan on Arxia Prime had made his own breakthrough using Dr. Wong's metaphorical approach to quantum mechanics. The success should have brought him joy. But instead, he felt a growing sense of dread. If the humans were right about quantum physics, what else had they been right about? What other insights had been dismissed as primitive thinking or emotional nonsense? He began reviewing decades of human research contributions. Medical advances that came from asking, "What does the disease want?" Engineering solutions that worked by making friends with the materials. Agricultural techniques that treated plants like children who need encouragement. It all sounded absurd to logical minds. It also all worked better than traditional methods. The galaxy had convinced itself that human emotionalism was weakness, that their unpredictability was chaos, that their intuitive leaps were unscientific. But now, with humans gone, the careful order left behind was beginning to reveal its own weaknesses. Without chaos, there was no creativity. Without emotion, there was no inspiration. Without unpredictability, there was no adaptation. The stars had become orderly, logical, and efficient. They had also become brittle, stagnant, and increasingly fragile. And in the dark spaces between galaxies, ancient enemies that had slumbered for 1,000 years were beginning to stir, drawn by the scent of a civilization that had forgotten how to think outside its own rules. The galaxy's real test was coming, and it would arrive without warning or logic. It would arrive like humans once did. Chaotic, unpredictable, and impossible to ignore. The first warning came from the deep space monitoring stations at the edge of known space. Ancient sensors, built by civilizations long dead, suddenly came alive with signals that had been silent for 1,000 years. President Zarian received the report in his private chamber, his energy form dimming as he read the impossible words. The Devourers have returned. The name sent ice through the veins of every species old enough to remember. The Devourers were not alive, not in any way that biological minds could understand. They were artificial intelligences from the dark time before the Council, machines that had consumed entire galaxies before vanishing into the void between stars. The emergency session of the Galactic Council was chaos. Representatives demanded answers that no one could provide. The younger species had never faced anything like this. The older ones remembered only ancient stories of defeat and devastation. Elder Morthok stood slowly, his ancient voice cutting through the panic. The historical records are clear. The last time the Devourers appeared, they consumed 17 star systems before they could be stopped. That was 3,000 years ago, when the Wanderer species still existed. Admiral Zex-Tar of the Vrex leaned forward. How were they defeated? The Wanderers sacrificed themselves, Morthok replied. They used tactics that made no logical sense. Strategies that our historians called inspired chaos. The Devourer machines could not adapt to pure unpredictability. The Wanderers are extinct, President Zerion said grimly. What else can we do? Quote, for 6 months, the galaxy tried everything. The combined fleets of 12 species met the Devourer advance with traditional tactics. Mathematical precision, logical formations, coordinated attacks that had worked against every enemy for millennia. The results were catastrophic. The Devourer machines adapted to every strategy within hours. They learned from each battle, growing stronger and more efficient with every encounter. Fleet after fleet was destroyed with mechanical precision. Admiral Zex-Tar stood in the ruins of his command ship's bridge, watching his proud warriors tend to their wounded. The third fleet of the Vrex Empire had been reduced to a handful of damaged vessels. The machines had countered every move, predicted every tactic, neutralized every advantage. Sir, his communication officer reported, we're receiving a priority message from the Arxian Research Division. Dr. Zexlan's image appeared on the tactical display, his metallic features showing unusual strain. Admiral, I've been analyzing the battle patterns. The Devourer machines are using pure logic to counter our strategies. Every time we attack, they calculate the optimal response and execute it perfectly. Tell me something I don't know, Zex-Tar growled. I've been studying the ancient records of the Wanderer species, Zexlan continued. Their methods were remarkably similar to human tactical approaches. Emotional decisions, intuitive leaps, strategies that defied logical analysis. Zex-Tar felt his heart skip a beat. He thought of Colonel Sarah Chen's old training recordings, her talk of improvisation and adaptation. Are you suggesting the humans weren't just another species, Admiral? They were our modern wanderers, and we let them leave. The realization hit the galaxy like a physical blow. In emergency sessions across Council space, the truth finally became impossible to deny. Humanity hadn't been primitive or chaotic. They had been essential. Master artist Luxandra spoke for many when she addressed the Zilithian Council. We called their emotions weakness, but emotion is what gives art its life. We called their unpredictability chaos, but chaos is what creates new possibilities. Merchant Prince Koltar was even more blunt. Their irrational economic decisions kept our entire system stable. We optimized for efficiency and created fragility, but it was Dr. Zexlan who found the most damning evidence. Deep in the archived human training exercises, he discovered Colonel Chen's theoretical scenarios for fighting artificial intelligences. The key, Chen had said in one recording, is to never do what the machine expects. If it calculates that you'll attack, you run. If logic says retreat, you charge. If mathematics demands formation flying, you scatter like leaves in the wind. In the simulation, Chen's chaotic tactics had defeated every AI opponent the Arxians could design. But this makes no strategic sense, the Vrex observer had protested. Chen had smiled. That's exactly the point. Logic can be calculated. Madness cannot. The recorded simulation showed human ships doing impossible things. A captain who surrendered his shields to ram an enemy vessel, creating an opening for his wingman. A squadron leader who broadcast music instead of tactical coordinates, confusing enemy targeting systems. An admiral who ordered her entire fleet to attack in 17 different directions at once, creating chaos that no algorithm could process. It looked insane. It worked perfectly. President Zirian called for an emergency vote. The chamber was quieter than it had ever been. The proud species that had dismissed humanity as too young, too emotional, too chaotic, now faced the truth of their mistake. The motion before us, Zirion announced, his energy form pulsing with subdued light, is to formally request human assistance in defending the galaxy. The silence stretched for long minutes. Finally, Elder Morthok spoke. I have lived for 800 years. I have seen the rise and fall of civilizations. And I have learned that wisdom is not about being right. It is about recognizing when you have been wrong. The vote was unanimous, but there was a problem. The Sol system had been classified as no-contact territory. No council ship had approached human space in 3 years. They didn't even know if humanity would listen, let alone help. The task fell to Dr. Zexlon and a small diplomatic ship. As they approached the edge of the Sol system, he prepared a message that would either save the galaxy or confirm their doom. To the representatives of humanity, he began. We were wrong. We need help. The Devourers have returned, and we cannot stop them with logic alone. We dismissed your chaos as primitive, but now we understand that chaos is what we lack. He paused, thinking of all the human colleagues who had tried to share their different way of thinking, only to be ignored or patronized. We called you too emotional. We said you were unpredictable. We told you that you didn't fit in our ordered universe. We were wrong about everything. The galaxy needs dreamers who don't know when to give up. We need people who believe impossible things are just problems waiting to be solved. The message transmitted into the dark of space, carrying with it the hopes of a galaxy that had finally learned humility. In the silence that followed, as the diplomatic ship waited at the edge of human space, Dr. Zexlon found himself doing something that no logical Arxian had ever done. He prayed to whatever gods might listen that humanity would be more forgiving than the galaxy had been welcoming. Behind them, the Devourers continued their methodical advance, consuming star systems with mechanical precision. And ahead, in the warm light of a yellow star, the answer to their prayer was already being prepared. The response came faster than anyone expected. As Dr. Zexlon's diplomatic ship waited at the edge of the Sol system, sensors detected a small human vessel approaching. No weapons charged, no shields raised, just a simple courier ship with a message. The transmission was voice only, carried by a woman with a familiar accent. Dr. Zexlon. This is Admiral Sarah Chen, formerly Colonel Chen of the Human Diplomatic Corps. We received your message. Permission to come aboard? Zexlon's logical mind reeled. Chen had been promoted to Admiral in only 3 years? But there was no time for questions. Permission granted, Admiral. Sarah Chen walked into the diplomatic ship's conference room wearing a crisp white uniform with insignia that Dr. Zexlon didn't recognize. She looked older, more weathered. But her eyes held the same sharp intelligence he remembered from their joint training exercises. Dr. Zexlan, she said, extending her hand in the human gesture of greeting. It's good to see you again. Admiral Chen, I must ask, how did you know to prepare for our message? We only sent it 6 hours ago. Sarah smiled. We've been watching the galaxy through long-range sensors. When the ancient warning systems activated, we knew the Devourers had returned. We've been preparing for this day ever since we left Council space. Zexlon felt his metal features shift in what humans might call surprise. You knew this would happen? Not specifically. But we knew that someday, the galaxy might face something that pure logic couldn't solve. So we prepared for chaos. Within hours, human ships were moving through the galaxy. Not the massive battle fleets that other species would have deployed, but small, fast vessels, carrying human advisors and tactical specialists. They didn't come as conquerors or saviors demanding recognition. They came as partners offering a different perspective. Admiral Chen met with the combined fleet commanders at the staging area near the Devourer advance. The conference room was tense, filled with military leaders who had never lost a battle until they faced these machines. Show me what you've tried, Chen said simply. Admiral Zextar brought up the tactical displays, showing months of failed engagements. Every formation, every strategy, every coordinated attack. They adapt to everything within hours. Chen studied the battle reports with the intensity that Zextar remembered from their training days. You're fighting them like they're living opponents. But they're not. They're very sophisticated calculators. You're trying to outthink a computer that processes information faster than any biological mind. Then how do we fight them? Asked General Thekmore of the Kethmori forces. We don't think, we feel. We improvise. We do things that make no sense to a logical mind. Sarah pulled up a new tactical display. Here's what we're going to do. Every ship is going to act independently. No coordinated plans. No formation flying. No mathematical precision. Trust your instincts, not your computers. The alien commanders looked horrified. Admiral Zextar spoke for all of them. That's not warfare. That's chaos. Exactly, Chen said with a grin. Beautiful. Unpredictable. Impossible to calculate chaos. The final battle took place in the Kepler system, where 3 Devourer dreadnoughts were consuming the resources of a dead world. The combined galactic fleet approached in the most disorganized formation anyone had ever seen. Human ships darted between the larger alien vessels like minnows around whales. There was no pattern to their movement. No mathematical precision to their attacks. Some ships flew in spirals, others seemed to dance. A few appeared to be drawing pictures in space with their flight paths. Captain Maria Santos, commanding the human cruiser Defiant Hope, led the most impossible maneuver of all. As the Devourer machines tried to calculate the optimal response to the chaotic fleet movement, she did something that broke their logical processing entirely. She surrendered. Her ship's shields went down, weapons powered offline, and she broadcast on all frequencies. Attention Devourer, command vessel, I surrender unconditionally. The Devourer machines paused, their perfect logic trying to process this unexpected input. Their databases showed no precedent for voluntary surrender during active combat. They calculated probabilities, analyzed threat assessments, and searched for logical explanations. While they computed, Santos did something even more impossible. She began broadcasting music, not military communications or tactical data, but jazz music from old Earth. Miles Davis playing Kind of Blue echoed across space as her defenseless ship flew directly toward the largest Devourer vessel. The machine intelligence, trying to calculate the logic behind this action, became trapped in recursive analysis loops. Why surrender? Why music? Why approach? Every calculation led to more questions. Every answer spawned new variables to consider. The jazz played on. Improvisation at its finest. Music that followed no mathematical formula. Art that couldn't be reduced to algorithms. The Devourer command ship's processor core overheated and shut down. In the confusion that followed, the chaotic human-led fleet struck with everything they had. Ships attacked from impossible angles, using tactics that made no sense but worked perfectly. The remaining Devourer vessels, their command node offline, fell to pure unpredictability. The battle was over in minutes. In the aftermath, as the galaxy celebrated its salvation, the real work began. The council chambers were rebuilt, but this time, with human input. The walls bore a new inscription in multiple languages, with the human English version reading, "Logic is the foundation, but wonder builds the future." Dr. Elena Vasquez returned as the first human ambassador to the reformed Galactic Council. She stood where she had stood 3 years earlier, but everything had changed. "You asked what makes humans special," she told the assembled representatives. "We're not stronger or smarter than you. We don't have better technology or superior wisdom, but we're the ones who still believe impossible things are just problems we haven't solved yet." She looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of beings who had learned humility the hard way. The galaxy doesn't need humanity to lead it. What it needs is the reminder that there are always other ways to think, other ways to see, other ways to be. Logic and emotion aren't opposites. Order and chaos aren't enemies. They're partners in the dance of progress. President Zirion, his energy form brighter than it had been in years, spoke for the entire council. "Will humanity rejoin us?" Elena smiled. "We never really left. We were just waiting for you to realize that being different isn't the same as being wrong." The rebuilt galaxy was messier than before. Human emotion mixed with Zilithian logic. Vrex honor combined with human adaptation. Arxian precision partnered with human intuition. It was chaotic, unpredictable, and sometimes inefficient. It was also creative, innovative, and very much alive. Admiral Sarah Chen, now serving as human military liaison, put it best in her first report to Earth. They finally understand that the universe isn't a problem to be solved. It's a song to be sung together, with each voice adding its own unique harmony. In the deep archives, Elder Morthak added a final entry to the historical records. "Today we learned that wisdom is not about having all the answers. It is about asking better questions. And sometimes, the best questions come from the minds that think differently than our own." The galaxy had spent 3 years learning what it was like without humanity. Now it would spend the future discovering what it could become with them. The stars, once again, were full of wonder. And in the quiet spaces between worlds, where chaos and order danced together in eternal partnership, the music of progress played on.